So, okay. Well, I think we will get started. I'm glad that everyone could join us over this noon hour. I know quite a few of you, but I'm Jamie Farman, and I'm the Community Development Coordinator based in Pierre for the foundation. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items before we jump right into it. And we hope that you keep, so please keep your microphone on mute unless you'd like to ask a question. You'll be automatically muted as soon as you're popped into our group here. We do have a time at the end of Steph's presentation for questions, so we hope you keep those in mind for later. And if you feel more comfortable, please add any questions that you have in the chat box, and we do have staff that will be monitoring that chat box as we go. So with that, I have the privilege of introducing our host for today, South Dakota Community Foundation's President and CEO, Stephanie Judson. So thanks, Steph, for being with us. Stephanie has been with the foundation for almost 25 years now, and 8 of them as our president, I believe, if I have my math right. She oversees our strategic vision, donor relations, and grant program development. And she also uses her skills as a certified financial planner and a certified gift planning associate to guide donors and nonprofits to the best plan giving options for them. She works directly with our board of directors to execute the mission and the vision of the foundation. She enjoys connecting with people who want to leave this state better than they found it and who are committed to giving to the places they've called home. She is thankful for the progress the foundation has made since its inception in 1987 and is committed to deepening its positive impact on South Dakota. We've done much shifting over the last year at the foundation here, but we're so grateful to have Stephanie at the helm, and she's done a tremendous job in leading our organization through this last year, through the crisis that was the pandemic. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Stephanie.
Thanks a lot, Jamie, and I'm just really honored to get to be part of your Lunch and Learn series. I know that I joined a number of my colleagues who have been having the opportunity to communicate with you via the Lunch and Learn, so it's really exciting for me. I wanted to make a comment before I depart this first slide. This picture that you see on the first slide is a picture that you often see in some of our branding on our old website, as well as a photo that we actually give to each of our outgoing board members. And the comment has been made in the past, they're not sure if it's the sun rising or the sun setting. Maybe for them on our board, it's the sun setting, but I think we can all agree that having just come through this last year, as we head into 2021 and beyond, that this is, let's pretend we're all looking east and this is the sun rising, because I think there's a lot for us to look forward to in the year ahead, and really glad that you're with us today. I also want to make sure that we keep this conversation a little bit more informal, in that if you see something on a slide and you have a question about it, I am not going to be at all offended if you just interrupt and ask that question, if we can just control it. We have a pretty small group, and I think we can navigate that today. Also, if you feel more comfortable waiting to the end, there is going to be time for questions and some wrap up with myself and my other colleagues. Or you can, as Jamie mentioned, shoot a chat, and she may even just interrupt our conversation on that slide in order for us to take care of your question. But it's really in my honor to be here with you today and just share a brief overview of what 2020 consisted for the foundation, and also a glimpse into our strategic plan. So I really plan today to talk about the coronavirus efforts, the response efforts that we launched at the first quarter of 2020. I also want to talk a little bit about nonprofit needs assessment that's guiding our work, in addition to the nonprofit sector study, and then share with you some of our investment performance and other operation details. And as I mentioned, a little glimpse into what's ahead in our strategic plan. So oftentimes when I'm talking about the Community Foundation, I identify as having 2 arms of the foundation. One arm is the grant making arm. And when I'm talking about grant making, I'm talking about the grants that our board oversee and approve. And those grant programs that we administer in-house, those grant programs are the South Dakota Fund grant process and the Community Innovation Grant process, which is a partnership with the Bush Foundation. And I'll get into a little bit more detail, but most of you are familiar with those two grant programs. And then the other arm, or the other side of the foundation, is the fund development side and the fund management side. And what's encapsulated in that side of the foundation are, we manage several different types of funds. We manage agency endowed funds that benefit nonprofits across the state. We manage, of course, our community savings accounts and our nonprofit savings accounts, which give both our communities and our nonprofit partners an opportunity to build assets and resources for the benefit of their communities and nonprofit organizations. We manage designated funds where they're earmarked for a specific nonprofit. These types of funds are started or initiated by donors typically. We manage donor advised funds where we work with individuals and families and even some businesses who want to have an opportunity to make flexible gifts to the foundation and then have the ability to decide on an annual basis or whatever degree of frequency they want to what nonprofit and charitable activities they want to support. And then we have a very robust scholarship program as well. Over 300 scholarship funds that benefit students throughout the state. So that gives you a little bit of a glimpse. I think most of you on the call are probably familiar with the types of activities that we manage here at the foundation, and those two arms of the foundation, as I mentioned. So the first arm, our grant making team, wanted to make sure everyone's familiar with Ginger Neiman, our senior program officer, and Janet Ricketts, our program assistant. These two ladies do an incredible job facilitating both our South Dakota Fund grants and our Community Innovation grants. So if you've called and asked a question about our grant programs, chances are that you have visited with either Ginger or Janet. So 2020 and the coronavirus pandemic really elicited a response from us very, very quickly. And I wanted to just briefly highlight some of the efforts that we made, our team made, in order to help nonprofits and individuals really respond to the challenges that the coronavirus was instigating in our state. One of the first things that we did, we were days into the pandemic. I think on the 15th or 16th of March, we launched an effort to raise money to move forward in a coronavirus response grant program. And through that effort, we were successful in raising over $1 million. The $1 million have been committed to immediate response to coronavirus related issues. Our other approach as a part of this three-prong approach was to work directly with our community savings accounts and helping them deploy resources in their communities. And we did that by offering a matching grant program. We committed $250,000 for matching grants in order for nonprofits to, if our community savings accounts were willing to commit some of their distributable income to respond to the needs in their communities, we would match those dollars. And we've done a couple of rounds of those. The first round was up to $3,000 we would match, and then subsequent rounds were up to $5,000. And we really relied heavily on many of you on this call, in fact. We really relied heavily on many of you to help deploy resources in your communities in a way that was needed most. And then the third part of our approach to addressing COVID-19 issues was reprioritizing our two major programs, our two major grant programs, both the South Dakota Fund and the Community Innovation Grant Program. And by reallocating or reprioritizing those two grant programs, we were able to commit an additional $1 million to help nonprofits respond appropriately to the crisis. Now, as we look ahead into 2021, the South Dakota Fund is still focusing on coronavirus relief efforts. And so if you're interested in applying to the South Dakota Fund, our grant making committee is going to review those and helping respond to coronavirus needs that have continued to arise with our nonprofit partners. On the Community Innovation Grant side, our partnership with the Bush Foundation, that has resumed now in 2021. So those dollars are back to be applied for in 2 separate rounds. The first round just opened in February 1st and will go through the 26th of February. So if you're interested in applying for a grant, make sure you go to our grant making resources on our website. Round 2 will open July 1st and go through July 30th. And for any of you who have been a part of the Community Innovation Grant program in the past, there used to be 3 rounds, but now there will be 2 rounds as we move forward in 2021. And really grateful again for that partnership with the Bush Foundation. We're going to continue in our South Dakota Fund to focus on coronavirus issues, at least until our grant making committee gets a chance to meet again and review that decision. But right now, the Community Innovation Grant process is back to what it used to be prior to the pandemic. So feel free to look into those grant making opportunities.
And Steph, before you move on from this slide, we did have a question about the community savings account matching funds and if there's any additional funds there. And there are very limited amount, but we are going to be introducing it back to our community savings accounts in this month's email update. And you're able to apply for those matching funds through your CSA through March 31st is our plan. So if you do have any COVID needs in your community that your foundation is your community savings account is looking to fund, please reach out to me or another development team member, and we'd be happy to help you get that application in for those matching funds.
It's a great question. Thanks, Jamie. Our goal is to get all of those assets deployed to be working in our communities. So what's guiding our work and why our grant making committee in part decided to continue to focus on coronavirus response efforts was the responses that we had from a nonprofit needs assessment that we conducted with several partners, which included the Bush Foundation, the Vakurovich Foundation, and United Way of the Black Hills. This was a statewide assessment, a 2-part survey that went out to nonprofits across the state. And some of the findings are really guiding our work and helping us to determine when we might see a tide shift in some of the needs that our nonprofits are facing. But we know right now that 87% of the respondents reported to being negatively impacted by COVID. I don't think that surprises any of us. 64% noted a decrease in donations, and some of that was related to the fact that they couldn't rely on some of the same in-person fundraising activities that they had been able to in the past, and so that has affected their bottom line. 38% of those surveyed were unable to meet with clients in person, so again impacting the way they do business, the course of their business. And 36% struggle with securing needed volunteers. And that doesn't surprise us either, as we were asking a lot of the age group that typically volunteers to stay home and be very cautious. We have a number of organizations across South Dakota who are really struggling to find their volunteers. So some of these findings are really why our grant making committee decided to let's continue to utilize our resources, at least right now, to help our nonprofits respond to the impact of the continued impact of the coronavirus. Some of our programmatic work, of course, has always been around increasing the capacity of our nonprofit sector. We know that we are all stronger when our nonprofit sector is stronger. And so 2020 saw the launch of a nonprofit capacity building program that actually started planning back in 2019. But it's something I wanted to make sure everyone on this call is aware of as an opportunity for us to continue to raise the level of our nonprofits through development work. In this case. So we partnered with the Lilly School of Philanthropy through the Indiana University, as well as CFRE, which is a certification opportunity that designates individuals who have gone through a rigorous coursework in fundraising. And our goal, as we review and work with nonprofits across the state, we understand that there is really a need for competent and skilled development staff. And this really partners well with our goal to help our nonprofit sector in our state capture part of that transfer of wealth. If you've heard me speak in the past, we've talked about that transfer of wealth that's occurring here in South Dakota. And we want to make sure that every nonprofit in our state is poised with the adequate staff and expertise that they need to help secure some of that wealth, keep those dollars here in South Dakota, and keep them working for all of us. So this program, this nonprofit capacity building program, is a 15-month program. It's based in a cohort learning session. So there are 4 in-person or virtual sessions as they are now, as well as some self-study opportunities and commitments. Again, this is when the individuals are done, they will actually have a certificate in fundraising management from the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy. And they are also then be able to sit for the certified fundraising executive examination. The first cohort was launched in early March of 2020 before the pandemic hit, and that was an in-person session in Mitchell at Dakota Wesleyan. And the second session for that class, as well as the first session for cohort 2, had to go to a virtual session. So they've been meeting by Zoom. In fact, our very own Jamie Farman is a part of cohort 2 and has been participating via classes in Zoom. So we're really grateful that everyone could shift as quickly as they could and adapt. I still think that cohort learning is working really well. The feedback that we've had from those that are part of cohort 1 and now part of cohort 2 has been very, very positive. And then I also want to make mention that the third cohort applications will open in June of 2021, and they will have their first session in November 2021. And we have our fingers crossed that can be an in-person session. But this is a part of, again, our programmatic effort to increase the capacity of our nonprofit partners across the state. And I'd encourage any of you to take advantage of it, or be sure and pass this information along to anyone else who might be interested. That second arm of the foundation, as we started in our at the beginning of our presentation, of course, is the fund management and fund development efforts. And I wanted to introduce you to our development team, Jeff Feldkamp, Beth Massa, Jamie Farman, and Pat Gallagher. I think if most of you on the call have had an opportunity to work with one or all of them, and they're a fantastic team, really. We have everyone spread across the state, and so we're really happy to have them here with us today. All of our development team are on the call, and they'd be happy to answer any questions as well, but we rely very heavily on them to represent the Community Foundation throughout the state. So their efforts in 2021, of course, we had a lot of challenges around how do you raise money in a pandemic? How do you connect with people in a pandemic? But I think the entire team shifted really quickly, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for their professionalism as we embarked on this unique challenge. But our first area of activity was engaging partners in our own coronavirus response efforts. So I mentioned that, over $1 million that we raised through our coronavirus relief or response fund that we established in the very, very early days of the virus. In addition to that, we had donors emerge that wanted to commit dollars from their own funds to help leverage some of the resources and grant making that we were doing through that coronavirus response effort. And oftentimes it's our development team that is that connecting point for those donors, those organizations, along with our grant making effort to continue to make those grants and leverage those dollars. Our grant making team, our development team also did an excellent job reaching out to donors who are working on estate plans. I guess there's something about a worldwide pandemic that really brings attention to planning, business planning, estate planning, etc. And so we had a lot of donors we've had long-term relationships with that wanted to reach out and talk about how they might include charity in their estate plan. We also had great feedback from our key club members, which we'll talk about, but those professional advisors that were working with their clients. And so we had a lot of contact with those individuals and making sure that we could help structure a plan that made the most sense for both the donors and their families. We also promoted the provisions of the CARES Act that incentivized giving in 2020, and some of those that is actually spilling over into 2021. And, one such provision of the CARES Act, and I think one that's was really high on a lot of our donors' priority list, was the fact that typically a gift to a public foundation has some limitations in the deductibility. Typically, that's capped at 60% of your adjusted gross income can be deducted. In this case, through the CARES provision, that was lifted. That limit was lifted from 60% to up to 100% of your adjusted gross income. So that made a difference in some people's planning, and that provision is extended into 2021 as well. So what that means for some folks who may have originally planned to make those provisions as a part of their will or their estate planning, it may have offered them greater incentives to make some of those gifts now, start some of that giving now, maybe establish their fund now to take advantage of those tax incentives. And then we had to really modify how we engage with people. We are big in-person meetings and engagements. That's how we operate. We like sitting across the table from someone and having a cup of coffee. And that really had to change as a result of the pandemic. So I think the entire development team really focused on calls, emails, cards, etc. A lot of Zooms. I think we're all pretty proficient in Zooms anymore. And so our development team did a really good job of kind of pivoting so that we could meet donors and organizations where they were. And then amongst this, we also continued our efforts in-house to continue to call attention to the foundation. And a part of that is our marketing efforts. And I'm really happy to report that we're not too far away from a brand new website. And Jamie and the development team have been working hard on that. And we'll be really excited to see that unveiled here. Jamie, when's our date? It's March, 1st of March, end of March?
March 24th. We'll
March 24th, there you go.
Yep.
So I've seen some sneak peeks, and you're going to want to make sure that you check out our website sometime after March 24th. It'll be a lot cleaner, neater, and easier to navigate. So just a snapshot of those development efforts in 2020, we established 77 new funds, and we talked a little bit earlier about the types of funds that those fall into. Over 4,500 individual gifts processed. In a second, you'll see the team that gets to process those gifts. Right now, actually a team of one, but we're expanding that, and complete a variety of complex gifts in 2020 that totaled over $185 million. So a 300% increase of any other year that we have had here at the foundation. And the funds that we manage, so that second arm of the foundation, all of those funds that we manage outside of the money that our grant making programs award, the funds that we managed awarded an additional $18 million to nonprofits across South Dakota. And just so pleased that we could be a part of those investments in our state. I think we really helped a lot of people when they needed it most. And our donors really stepped up to the challenge. And so very, very happy about those investments in South Dakota. We mentioned again, we talked earlier about those fund types. And I think it's interesting when you look at a snapshot of the different fund types that we manage and the assets that are invested by fund type. But I will say, this is percentages by assets, not number of funds. But just to give you some quick idea, our scholarship fund program, for instance, makes up 6% of the assets that we manage, but we have over 300 scholarships that are managed individually across South Dakota. It takes a lot of effort on part of our finance and operations team. Agency funds, really want to make sure we make the point on this call too with some of our nonprofit partners that we manage over 154 funds that benefit specific nonprofits across the state, that those organizations themselves, those nonprofit agencies, have decided that we can be their endowment arm, we can be their investment arm for that purpose. And so they make up roughly 14% of the assets, but those partnerships really mean that those nonprofits don't have to have a separate organization or separate entity investing those dollars. They can partner together for all those inherent efficiencies that the Community Foundation can offer to provide those long-term resources for their organization. The designated funds, 39% of the assets that we manage are earmarked for specific organizations. There's nearly 300 designated funds. Those designated funds are started by donors or groups of people who want to initiate funds to benefit a specific nonprofit organization. The big difference between the agency funds and the designated funds are really who's initiate them. The designated funds are started on behalf of multiple donors who want to benefit an organization. So they're really donor directed versus agency directed in the case of agency funds. And then of course, you're all familiar with our community savings account program, roughly 11% of our assets, but over 80 partnerships through communities across South Dakota that we rely really heavily on the work that you're doing, the knowledge of your community as we try to not only invest dollars in those communities, but also provide the infrastructure for people in those communities to make gifts to support their hometowns and their beloved communities. And then 24% of our assets in those donor advised funds, as we talked about earlier, where those families can make decisions on an annual basis or more frequent basis on what nonprofit and charitable activities they want to support. But that roughly is about 138 funds that we manage in the donor advised fund space. Our Legacy Society, we also did a lot of work in our Legacy Society here recently, and we really want twofold. We really want to recognize people for their generosity. We want to not only thank them, but we also want to encourage others who might be inspired by the generous gifts and planning that individuals have done. And so our development team, and Beth Massa leads this effort too, with our Legacy Society, established these criteria or these club membership opportunities that give us a chance to recognize those folks who have really done some work in their community. So several of you are familiar with our Hometown Heroes. We have 30 new Hometown Heroes last year, those who have made a significant gift to benefit their community. I have over to the right, two of those, Doug and Marlis Balvin from over in Huron. We recognized them late in 2020 as Hometown Heroes. And there's a picture of them receiving their recognition gift. And then we also have established the Kristen Larson Heritage Circle. This group honors two of our largest donors, as well as our largest supporters, former board members, Paul and Muffy Kristen, and Dale and Pat Larson. Both Paul and Dale were on our board at the very, very early formation of the South Dakota Community Foundation. They, along with their spouses, have been lifetime contributors to the foundation, Paul and his late wife Muffy, as well as Dale and his late wife Pat. So we wanted to really honor their legacy, or excuse me, their gifts to the Community Foundation through the establishment of the Heritage Circle. And that honors those who have made a significant planned gift during their lifetime or in their estate. And then we also want to honor those professional advisors who have referred clients to the South Dakota Community Foundation. And proud to say that we have 75 Key Club members who fit that description. So we've had an opportunity to get together in person with several of those prior to the pandemic and look forward to connecting with those. They're a great resource for us. They're also a great connecting point to their clients, and we're honored to work with them to help their clients accomplish their philanthropic goals. So shifting to the finance and operations team that really are more behind the scenes than they should be, quite honestly, but that keeps both our grant making arm and our fundraising and management arm moving forward. So Clay Cudmore, our CFO and our Chief Financial Officer and Administrative Officer, Kelly Nelson, our Program Accountant and Scholarship Coordinator, Carly Winter, who is our compliance manager and newly hired, just started literally on Monday. So why her picture doesn't maybe match the rest here, our accounting clerk, Jennifer Schutzel. So welcome, Jennifer, to the team. We rely very heavily on the processing of all of our gifts and grants, and then of course, our investments. And I wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about our investment, not only just our performance, but really how it's structured. We get a lot of questions about how the assets of the Community Foundation are administered. And I really want to start by highlighting a relationship that we have with the South Dakota Investment Council. That relationship has existed since our inception. It dates back to when Steve Myers was the chief investment officer for the state of South Dakota, and now extends on that his successor is in that role, Matt Clark. And both of those gentlemen have been involved not only in the establishment of our investment policy, but now also helping and guide our asset allocation, the implementation of our investment policy. So we began, and here's how that played out for us this year. We began 2020 at a minimum equity threshold of roughly 50%. And these determinations, these allocations are really guided by a series of data around the price to earnings ratios. And again, the professionals at the South Dakota Investment Council are really guiding the allocations at different times based on that valuation model. So when we saw that market decline happen in March, on March 12th, that triggered an increase in our equity allocation. And our steps would have been to go to 50%, from 50 to 60%. We bypassed that 60%. The drop was steep enough that it sent us to go all the way to 77% allocation of our stock portfolio, or equity allocation to 77%. Then, of course, we saw some steep market increase. So again, based on market valuations, that triggered a reduction in equities down to 60%, and that was in late April. And then followed by a return to our 50% minimum in early June. And so having all of these levers at our disposal to help control our equity allocation really paid off for all of our funds that we manage here at the Community Foundation. So our performance, one-year performance, is 15.6% relative to 13.8% in the benchmark. And then I've also shared with you our 5-year return of 9.7% and our 10-year return of 7.5%. Any specific questions on how the investments are handled? If we get in over our head, I know our CFO is on the call, so I can always kick it over to him quick. But suffice it to say that our relationship with the Investment Council has been a long-standing and a prudent relationship. We're grateful for them, for their guidance. As we know, the Investment Council's performance in managing the state's retirement assets has been among the top performers in our country since inception. So we're really grateful for their guidance. It allows us to invest our equities in index funds, which are very inexpensive, but have the added expertise in specializing those sub-equity allocation models to capture as much outperformance as we possibly can. And they really proved that here in 2020. And then I also want to mention that we've moved, in case you plan to drop by, and we hope that you do. So in the midst of a pandemic, we started a design process, as you'll see in the top photo here, which has now culminated into a new building, as you see in the bottom photo, that we moved into last Monday. So yeah, the paint is dry, but the walls are not decorated yet. And we would love to show you our new space here in Pierre. We're really close to our old office. So if you knew where we were, we're just the building directly to the east of our old office. And we have more space to accommodate our current team and our expanding team. So again, we would welcome you to our office anytime. And I certainly want to make sure that if you've called into the office, you've probably visited with one of our very friendly staff. Peggy Urquhart, Administrative Assistant, and Shelley Jund, Executive Assistant. She helps me stay a little bit more organized than I normally am, and really grateful for their help here at the foundation as well. That rounds out the 13 members now that we have on the South Dakota Community Foundation team. I'm going to stop there so that we can have some time for wrap up and some questions. And again, I want this to be pretty free flowing and informal. So feel free to ask questions of me or of any of my colleagues. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so I can see all of your bright, shiny faces.
Yeah, Stephanie, so I did have a question on what timeline we have around our spendable amount for this year. Do you want to kind of speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So we're in the process of finalizing year end. Our statements are now in, and we're working with a new accounting system, so it's posing a few challenges, but you'll have your statements and your spendable allotments here very, very soon. But I promise we won't spend the money. So we'll keep hanging on to it till you're ready to invest in our state.
Right. Well, does anybody else have some questions for Stephanie? I know we had a few that jumped on a little later in the hour here.
I don't know, but Janet had mentioned when we started this call that they were having chili for lunch, and now that's all I can think about, Janet. So
I know.
oh, you're on mute, but I bet it was good.
And put it with cornbread, it's even better yet.
Oh, that's too much. That sounds really great. So if you weren't all hungry before, I'm sure you all are now.
Right. Yeah. Well, I see we have Bob Sutton had joined us a little bit later, and Sean as well is on our board. Thanks for joining, Sean.
Yeah, it's always nice to have a couple of our board members join us. So thanks for pointing that out, Jamie. Good to see you both.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the little show today. I apologize for being late, but I'm fortunate to sit in on part of it. So thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, Steph, thank you. Great job. I joined late as well, but Sean's got such a prettier face for video than I do. So I'll go get rid of my video and just keep listening.
You can tell we have some fun here at the foundation, both with our team members as well as our board members, and really grateful to them. And I'm really grateful to all of you who work for your communities, who work to make sure there are assets to invest back in your communities, your partners in one way or another. I'm looking out and I see several of you that are connected, of course, with our community savings accounts, several of you connected with agency funds and partnerships, even in grant making. So it's really nice to see so many friendly faces. And we just appreciate those relationships that we're able to work and develop over these last 30 plus years now. So
Stephanie?
yes.
Congratulations, great year, wonderful work you're doing. I'm always amazed. I appreciate
Thanks,
hearing of all the updates. On the coronavirus funds, is still the real streamlined application, kind of a one-page, two-page type application?
Right. So there's, and thanks for asking the question. So how though we distinguish those immediate response needs, so out of that $1 million that we raised separate from our South Dakota fund, those dollars are really targeted to those immediate needs, and we're still utilizing that shortened abbreviated form. But our South Dakota fund, of course, we utilize the same application we always have, and those South Dakota fund dollars are actually being earmarked for coronavirus response efforts. So usually what we do is in that LOI process, Marcia, is where we can determine if this is an immediate response type grant where we can get an abbreviated form to you, or just collect information as we can to get those dollars invested in those communities as quickly as possible, or back out into those response efforts as quickly as possible. We are seeing a shift away from some of those more immediate needs to the longer term needs. And that's why our South Dakota fund is there to kind of pick up that slack. And we'll continue to focus those South Dakota fund dollars in that way, Marcia. So great question.
Thank you.
And I know too, Marcia, that the Lankford Foundation was able to take advantage of some of those matching funds. So the application for that is the same as the first one that we had sent out back in March. So if your board is looking into that, just know that it's still that same application.
I actually had an inquiry from the Lankford Community Foundation or Area Foundation this morning, asking if they could request a second round of that. Is that possible, or is it usually just one round for the community savings accounts?
We do still have dollars available to our CSAs for COVID matching funds. So that will be available to our CSAs through March 31st. So if there's COVID need in the community that their board or any of our CSAs on the call here are considering funding, please reach out to me or one of our development team and we can help with that. Well, do we have any other questions? I guess we could probably let you go a little early, but thank you so much, Steph, for your time today. I know.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's great to see everyone. Great to be a part of this.
Yeah, great to see faces. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.